Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for tonight's webinar. And it's going to be the second part of our three-part series of our MS Path to Care Wellness Webinar series, brought to you by Sanofi Genzyme and CanDo Multiple Sclerosis. For those of you who are new to CanDo MS, we provide health and wellness education programs for families with MS to help them thrive. Please visit our website, which is cando-ms.org, to learn more about CanDo MS's online and nationwide in-person programs. CanDo MS is proud to partner with Sanofi Genzyme on MS Path to Care, an industry-leading portal of resources aimed at educating and activating families living with MS to make shared decisions that optimizes their healthcare, their wellness, and their quality of life. Explore more MS Path to Care resources at mspath2care.com. We're proud this year to bring you new resources on the 6 dimensions of wellness that we'll discuss in a little bit. So please go online and visit those resources, along with all sorts of different programs and resources on partnering with your healthcare team, navigating healthcare resources, and strengthening support partnerships. As I mentioned, this is a three-part series, so if you were joined us last week, welcome back. We're going to cover all of the different elements of comprehensive wellness in these three webinars. So tonight we're going to focus on diet, exercise, and healthy behaviors, but please watch the archive if you missed last week to get the whole picture, and please join us next week for the final of our three-part series. We hope that tonight is an interactive discussion. So on your toolbar on the right, there should be a chat/question bar. If you click on that arrow, that should open up, and you can submit questions right there. And we'll try to save about 10 to 15 minutes at the end to answer as many questions as possible. Hopefully you were able to log on to GoToWebinar. If you have any issues with the technical side of things, you can call their support line at 877-582-7011. Before I introduce tonight's speakers, I do want to let you know that we'll have some vignette-based learning, so there'll be some real-life scenarios on the screen to try to prove our points and talk about different resources. So there'll be some scenario-based learning, as well as some polling questions that'll pop up on your screen, and you'll be able to answer the questions during live time, and we'll see the results come in. Unfortunately, for those calling in, you won't be able to access those polling questions, but you can certainly watch the archived version on cando-ms.org, and you'll be able to see the polling questions and the whole presentation. And then lastly, as a disclaimer, we're really going to be talking about wellness strategies around diet, exercise, and healthy behaviors. One thing we're going to avoid talking about is medication and specific disease-modifying therapies. So just to set your expectations, and as you submit questions, really focusing on some of those wellness strategies and resources and avoiding talking about medication. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to our two speakers that, again, should be familiar faces to everyone, and they are our speakers for this entire three-part series. So I'm excited to welcome back psychologist Roz Kalb and physical therapist Mandy Rorick. So I'll first turn things over to Roz.
Thanks, Brian, and I'm very pleased to be back here tonight with many of you, I hope, who have come for the second time, and always to be working with Mandy. And again, I am a psychologist, and I've worked in the field of MS for almost 40 years, and wellness is a big part of my focus of interest. So I'm glad to be here.
I too am really glad to be with all of you this evening, and welcome back again. Roz, thank you for collaborating efforts on this webinar as well as this entire series. Again, my name is Mandy Rorick, and I am a physical therapist out of Nebraska, and I'm also a programs consultant for CanDo MS. I've worked with folks who have MS for about 14 years now, so I'm very pleased to be with all of you this evening. Welcome. And let's start out by looking at the big picture. As Brian suggested early on in his introductory slides, this entire series is about wellness. And we view wellness in 6 dimensions. The first webinar series addressed the emotional well-being, spirituality, and cognitive well-being. And this particular webinar is, while it's only going to address one of the 6 dimensions, it's addressing a big one: diet, exercise, and healthy behaviors. So who can help? Who can help improve and address and manage challenges related to diet, exercise, and healthy behaviors? So I love this diagram because it's a very comprehensive diagram to illustrate all of the people and professionals who may help you manage your MS, not just this physical well-being dimension. But that said, of these professionals, I would kind of key in on the physical therapist, the occupational therapist, and the nutritionist or the dietitian, as well as your primary care provider, as kind of the core group that will help you take charge of this particular area of wellness. Now, that being said, your other providers in that kind of core healthcare team, or the blue inner circle, may help with some of those referrals to those other accessory or extended healthcare team members. But again, what I think is most important of all of this to note is that the person living with MS and the support partner are in the very center of this circle. You all are the primary drivers for the decision making for your health and wellness. You know, you're going to use the expertise of all of these healthcare team members, but you are the expert on your own body. So collaborate as a team and figure out the best strategies to help you manage your health and wellness.
That's great, Mandy. And before we move on, we're going to do our first polling question and just find a little bit about our audience here. So you should see a polling question coming out on front of your screen. And again, this is just to let us know who we have joining us tonight. So are you a person living with MS, a support partner, a person with MS and a support partner watching together, or the good old-fashioned other?
Well, we have a lot of people living with MS watching, and very few support partners or people watching together. And Mandy, I'm sure you'll agree with me that the wellness we're talking about is for everyone, people with MS and support partners. So for those of you who are people living with MS watching, we hope that you will take a lot of these key messages back to your support partners, because their health and well-being is just as important as yours, and they need support to take care of themselves.
Absolutely.
So our learning objectives for tonight are for participants or people with MS and support partners. So we want all of you to be familiar with the kinds of lifestyle behaviors that can have an impact on MS symptoms, on the way the disease behaves, and also on overall health and well-being, including what we call comorbid health conditions, or health conditions that people have in addition to their MS. So we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about those tonight. We want folks to be able to distinguish between exercise and rehabilitation and physical activity, and the roles that each of those play in managing MS symptoms and those comorbid health conditions. We want people to be aware of barriers they might encounter as they try to use these healthy behaviors, and what are some strategies to address those. And understand components of a healthy diet. We always have lots of questions about diet and MS, and we want people to leave here understanding what a healthy diet would look like for a person with MS. And lastly, to understand how diet, exercise, and healthy behaviors interact with one another and with other dimensions of wellness. So we have a lot to cover tonight.
That's right. And we'll go to our second polling question now, and talking about some of those healthy behaviors. So sort of to narrow down, what exactly are we talking about with lifestyle behaviors? Which of the following are an example of a healthy lifestyle behavior? We have exercise and physical activity, diet, smoking, regular medical checkups and monitoring, or all of the above. So as we talk about healthy behaviors, which of these do you think we're talking about here tonight? Give folks a couple more seconds to respond.
Terrific. That is absolutely correct. All of those are lifestyle behaviors that can impact your symptoms and disease activity, and that's why we're going to be talking about all of them in this evening's program. And now I would like to introduce you to Jan and John. Who will be coming up on the screen shortly.
Sorry about that. There it is.
Okay, so let's meet Jan first. She's 55 years old and has had MS for 15 years. Over the course of the 15 years, she's had a gradual worsening of her balance and walking problems, which have resulted in pretty regular falls, maybe on a monthly basis. She has a lot of MS fatigue and weakness in her legs. At this point, she's using a four-wheeled walker to get around in the community. She also has some other health conditions that we need to pay attention to. She has high blood pressure. She was recently diagnosed with osteopenia. She deals with constipation and also depression. So she has a lot on her plate. Her husband, John, is 57. He works as a bank manager. Over the past year, he's put on some weight, and his doctor recently told him that he has type 2 diabetes. His cholesterol is elevated, as is his blood pressure. He's very concerned about the progression of Jan's MS, which is giving him a lot of stress, adding to all of the other things he's dealing with in life, and he can't really figure out what to do or how to help Jan. Together, they cook much less frequently at home because of her MS fatigue. So they either bring in takeout food or they go out more than they did, which may have contributed to some of the other health issues that the two of them are experiencing. And they've had to stop riding bikes together, which is something they always love to do on the weekends because her balance is just not good enough for her to be safe on the bicycle. So they've pretty much given that up. So Mandy, can you talk to us about how Jan and John can start thinking about what they could do to make a difference in their wellness?
Absolutely. So we could think of this as kind of two large buckets, right? So for the person with MS, so for Jan in particular, she needs to work with her MS team to address her symptoms related to her MS. So that could be her difficulty with walking, her falls, those types of symptoms that are really impacting her life and their time together. Similarly, it's equally as important for Jan or the person with MS to also have a primary care provider that she sees annually. And the primary care provider, the purpose of that is for preventative care. So identifying those types of screens or well checks or vaccinations or other comorbid health conditions, which we'll go into a bit later, that need to be managed to keep her healthy. And just to address her overall health, not just her physical health. And this includes her emotional and her cognitive health. You know, I think they kind of play off of each other. So if someone has limited physical mobility, for example, and they struggle to get out of their home, they might find their world shrinking and feeling a bit more isolated. And that can contribute to mental health challenges, right? Maybe feelings of depression or anxiety related to not being able to get out as much. Similarly, if you're not feeling well emotionally, you're not going to want to get out and about and do different things. So it's really important that both are addressed if one or the other is an issue, and be aware of the relationship between the two. And as for the support partner, it is important for the support partner to also see a primary care provider at least yearly. So this is something that John probably needs to prioritize. He too needs preventative care, including those screenings and well checks we spoke about, and we'll speak at greater length in upcoming slides. And he also needs to address his overall health. In the situation of Jan and John, I suspect he may not be wanting to leave home very often if he's fearful of her falling. So that can contribute to his own emotional anxiety related to that as well. So again, there's a relationship between all of them. So while we all want to cure, right, Roz? We all want to cure. We all want to see that research driving forward, moving forward, and finding solutions to the disease itself. What can we do today? What can we do in the moment as we're waiting for those brilliant researchers to find that cure? So one of the things that we can do is work on managing these comorbid health conditions. And what are comorbid health conditions? Comorbid health conditions are any medical or mental health condition that exists in addition to the multiple sclerosis. Fortunately, it's modifiable and manageable with wellness strategies. So this is how you can use those team members that we identified in the first slide to figure out ways to minimize the effects of these on your physical health. The most common comorbid health conditions are depression and anxiety, diabetes, specifically type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and chronic lung disease. So I just want to highlight that a lot of these conditions, particularly the middle three, are vascular conditions. So again, can be influenced by things that we do, including diet and exercise. So Ross, it's clear that comorbid health conditions can have an impact on our overall health, but how specifically do comorbid health conditions impact MS?
Well, it's a great question, Mandy, and it's really only in the last 10 years or so that we've had so much research coming out telling us about the comorbid health conditions that people with MS have and their impact on the disease. So what we know is that at the time of diagnosis, people with MS already have more comorbid conditions than people of the similar age in the general population. We don't know why that's true, but we know that they have more to begin with. And we know that those comorbid conditions can slow the diagnostic process because it means there's a lot of things going on that can muddy the waters and can sometimes make it harder for the neurologist to make the diagnosis. They also contribute to more disability at the time of diagnosis. So people who have these conditions may struggle more right from the beginning. And the comorbidities, particularly the vascular ones that you called out, diabetes, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, can speed the progression of disability. And when you treat those comorbid conditions and get them under control, that can actually have a positive benefit, not only on your overall health, but on the disease progression as well. And most importantly, as is true in the general population, those vascular comorbidities, as well as some of the others, can contribute to a shortened lifespan. And so we really want to emphasize that while managing your MS is very, very important to your quality of life, managing these comorbidities can significantly affect your life with MS and your overall health. So the lifestyle behaviors that we're talking about aren't just froth or icing on the cake as you manage your MS. Those lifestyle behaviors can really improve your health. So we're going to talk about some different ways that you can manage comorbidities, and we're going to focus first on the area of diet. So what we want to look at first is what the research has shown us about diet in MS. So what we want people to be thinking about is the quality of the food that they're eating. So we can look at food as either being nutrient dense, meaning that it has a lot of healthy nutritional components that are good for our health, or it can be more calorie dense, where you're eating something that has a lot of calories but doesn't actually give you very many nutritional benefits. So we really want people to focus on adding more to that nutrient base. So all of the major groups that look at diet for health encourage the following list of foods, and you can see them balanced very nicely on the plate to the right. But we want a lot of colorful vegetables and fruits because they give a wide variety of nutrients. Lean proteins, so fish, poultry, pork, lean proteins. Beans, legumes, nuts, and seeds. We have a dietitian colleague of ours who loves to talk about all the benefits of beans. She wants everybody to really be getting a lot of beans and legumes in their diet. Whole grains, healthy fats, low-fat calcium foods, and really to limit the saturated fats, sodium, added sugars, and highly refined foods, which are what you get when you go and buy a lot of prepared foods from the store, and to avoid trans fats entirely. But what the plate on the right shows that it's really the balance of things that are important, because as you look at this plate on the right, it's important to notice that fruits and vegetables make up half of what the experts are recommending that you eat on a daily basis. Now, for those of you who were hoping to hear about a single diet or a magic diet that is going to transform your MS, there is no evidence yet that there is such a diet, which is why we are really focusing on this healthy, heart-healthy, balanced diet that's recommended for overall health and well-being. Now, one of the other reasons that diet is so important is that it interacts with MS symptoms in a pretty important way, right? So how you eat affects your bladder and bowel function. And almost everyone with MS deals at some point with issues around bladder and bowel, and the dietitians and nutritionists are really focus a lot on trying to help people manage their intake of fluids and fiber and fruits and vegetables to make sure that their bladder and bowel are functioning well. In addition, diet can affect our fatigue level, right? So that when we eat very high sugar foods and we get a sugar high and then we crash, that can contribute to feelings of fatigue. And when we're fatigued, we're less active, we're less mobile. And Mandy gives us lectures on how we need to keep moving to manage our symptoms and to be healthy. And mood and cognition also play a role, because if we're depressed, we may feel those feelings of fatigue that compound the fatigue of MS and just make us feel draggy and not want to do anything. And so we're less active and less mobile, which in turn contributes to bowel issues. So all of these symptoms interact with each other and are affected by the foods that we eat.
Thanks, Roz. So clearly, diet can have an impact on comorbid health conditions. But in addition to diet, there are medical management strategies that can really be beneficial for decreasing those comorbidities and improving overall quality of life. So let's talk a little bit about those medical strategies. So it's important to note that the primary care provider, so this could be a physician assistant, it could be a medical doctor, it could be a nurse practitioner who is your primary care provider that can help you manage these comorbid health conditions. And one of their objectives would be to help you manage or prescribe those medications that are necessary to help you manage those really important comorbid health conditions that we identified. So diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, depression. If medications are needed, what are those and how should they be prescribed? So they will help you manage that. Primary care providers will also help you with preventative screening. And it is important to note that there is the cdc.gov, they have a resource on their website. It's called a preventative checklist. So if you search that on their website, it should pop up. You can enter your age and you can enter your gender, and it will provide you a list of preventative screening, vaccinations, immunizations that you need for your age range. So it's kind of nice. Go ahead.
Mandy, let me just say that is a typo on the slide. So for those of you who didn't hear what Mandy said, it's cdc.gov. That's short for Centers for Disease Control.gov.
Thanks, Roz. Yeah, sorry about that. But please check that out because it is a nice conversation starter. You can go online, check out and see what you've accomplished or what you have covered, but then bring that paper or that resource to your appointment and have that conversation about what else do I need to do to make sure I'm addressing all of these recommendations. Weight management and weight monitoring. It is important for people to try to sustain a proper weight, to be within a healthy weight. So being underweight or being overweight can have implications for lots of your MS symptoms, including fatigue or your mobility challenges. So weight can be monitored and managed by a scale, the typical way. You step on the scale, you find out how many pounds. It can also be managed by circumference measurements. In PT, sometimes when people say they want to lose weight, we do circumference measurements around the hips and the waist. That's another way to gauge progress. There's also something called a body mass index, BMI. There are lots of BMI calculators online. Not necessarily as reliable for some people with different body types, but nonetheless, it gives you a range or a guide for where you may fall in your weight. The next one, the bone density screening. So the primary care provider can also help you find when and if it's appropriate for you to get your bone density checked. So the general recommendation is to get your bone density checked at 65 years of age if you're female, 70 years of age if you're male, and then have that checked about every 2 years thereafter. Now, that being said, for folks who have certain risk factors, like maybe perhaps you had long-term steroid use, or another risk factor may be that if you have frequent falls, or an assortment of things, or a history of fractures would be another good example. But if you have other risk factors, your primary care provider or your healthcare provider may actually want you to come in more often for bone density screening, just to make sure the proper interventions are taking place. And those interventions can be boosting the diet in a different way, calcium and vitamin D, as well as weight-bearing exercise, in addition to some potential medications that could also be helpful.
Can I ask a question, Mandy? So if, as a PT, if you are working with somebody who's younger than that recommended age, but their walking is impaired, right? Mm-hmm. And so they are not on their feet as much or getting as much exercise, would you want them to talk to their primary care provider about bone density screening earlier than that cutoff age?
Absolutely. I think if someone has those risk factors or has some risk factors, including what you described, Roz, yes, a conversation with your primary care provider would be very appropriate. Because I think it's like it's preventative, right? Where we're trying to get ahead of an obstacle like a fall that may result in a fracture, that may result in hospitalizations and all sorts of subsequent challenges that can happen. So I think the more proactive we can be, the better that we're setting ourselves up for success. Great question.
Thank you.
Consistent blood work. I think it's important to make sure that aside from maybe blood work that you're getting for your disease modifying therapies, but that you're also getting consistent blood work that's monitoring your overall physical health. And this may include your CBC, which just stands for complete blood count, where they look at your red blood cells, your white blood cells, your platelets. It can also include a metabolic panel, which is a little more of a snapshot into what's going on in your heart and your kidneys and your liver, or a more of a heart disease panel, which would look more at those triglycerides and the cholesterols, the LDL cholesterol, which is your bad cholesterol, and your HDL, which is your good cholesterol. It can kind of take a little deeper dive into that. All of that information, which would be really valuable for managing comorbid health conditions and your overall MS. And that last bullet point is just that reminder of what we touched on earlier, that emotional and cognitive wellness is key to making certain that all of these other areas are addressed. And I also want to add, and Roz would probably echo this, that all of this is important for the person living with MS, but it's also really important for the support partner. So for all of our listeners tonight who are living with MS, please take this information back to the ones that you love and that support you, and use it as a tool to support them on their journey for their own health and wellness as well. So how can you change your comorbidities? We've talked about diet, we've touched on medical management strategies, and now we'll talk about my favorite, exercise and physical activity. So there are kind of three pieces to this wheel of movement. And the three pieces are exercise, physical activity, and rehabilitation. And Roz is going to kind of talk us through how these pieces complement each other, but also how they differ slightly. Oh.
Wow, that was fancy. So physical activity is overarching, right? It's movement throughout the day, whether it's exercise, whether it's leisure activity, whether it's daily activities. So we are physically active over the course of our day. There is also exercise, which is more prescriptive. Recommendations for an exercise program are provided by somebody like Mandy, who's a PT, or an exercise physiologist, or sometimes it's an expert who is in another facility where you go and get an exercise program. But ideally, it is a specialist who understands MS and the role that exercise plays. And then that person recommends very individualized types of exercise to help you maintain or improve your physical health and mobility. Or they might help you following a relapse with certain types of exercises or interventions to help you regain any abilities that you may have lost during that relapse. But equally important, they can help you maintain so that you don't lose ground, so that you don't lose abilities just because you're not using your muscles very much. So they can actually recommend exercise programs for you to improve and or maintain your physical health and mobility. But the thing about exercise is that it's performed on a consistent basis in a specific way that's been recommended to you. Rehabilitation is an actual program. It can be outpatient or inpatient, but it's completed with a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, or a speech language pathologist. It can be used at the time of diagnosis or following a relapse or just with progression of the disease. And it has a definite beginning and a definite end. So when you start a rehabilitation program, you work with the specialist to identify what your specific goals of rehabilitation are, and you work over a specified period of time to achieve those goals. And again, it's to either recover function or to maximize function at whatever level you're able to do it, or to compensate as best as possible for any function that you've lost as a result of disease progression. Did I get that right, Mandy?
That was great. And I'm just going to add too, Roz, sometimes it's hard to find these people, right? It's hard to find specialists or even rehabilitation professionals who truly do understand MS. So I'm going to encourage you to reach out to the National MS Society and reach out to the MS navigators there, and they can help you find a provider who can work with someone who has MS. Other resources specifically for physical therapists would be the American Physical Therapy Association. You can do a search for a PT. You can't necessarily do a search for a PT who specializes in MS, but you can search for a PT who specializes in neurological challenges, which would have the letters after their name, like an NCS, so Neurological Certified Specialist. That would be also a good person to work with. And then the American Occupational Therapy Association, they also have a similar search feature where you can find a professional like that. I would also add professionals who have that MSCS delegation behind their name. Those are multiple sclerosis certified specialists, so they've taken an additional test just validating their expertise in MS as well. So that's another way that you can kind of sort out who may be most helpful for you and where else you can look. So what are the exercise and physical activity guidelines? The current recommendations for all people with MS are 150 minutes per week of either exercise, so what Roz talked about, the prescribed movement, or physical activity, which is all the other movement, including exercise. And for those who are able, 150 of each is optimal. So when we say this recommendation of 150 minutes per week, we say 150 minutes of moderate intensity. So moderate intensity can mean something different to Roz than it means to me, than it means to all of you. But a way that we can kind of quantify what that moderate intensity is by a scale we like to call the Rating of Perceived Exertion Scale. It's a 0 to 10 scale, with 0 being no effort, 10 being you can't give any more effort, is your maximal effort. What a moderate intensity would be is kind of that 3 to 5 out of 10 range. So as you're exercising along or doing whatever activity, you feel like you're exerting yourself and giving a little effort, but it's sustainable for a period of time. So that moderate intensity movement for 150 minutes per week is what's advised. We like that Rating of Perceived Exertion Scale truly because it does allow people to personalize that. And it's also adaptable to the fluctuating symptoms that people often experience. So for example, one day, a 3 to 5 out of 10 exertion may allow you to do 20 minutes on a bicycle. The next day or 2 days later, for reasons because of fatigue or assortment of other issues, 3 to 5 out of 10 effort might just be some gentle stretching. But to acknowledge it, you know what, that's okay. That still goes to that 150 minutes. That still counts because you're still doing that movement. Exercise and physical activity must be personalized, and I emphasize must, to meet each individual's needs, abilities, and preferences. I really, really, really do think it is helpful to meet with a physical therapist or an occupational therapist or an exercise specialist, even if you're just starting on this journey with MS, or if you've lived with MS for a lot of years. Meet with these folks regularly to make sure that the exercise and physical activities are helping you reach the goals that you want to maintain or sustain. And often people find it helpful to have kind of that menu of options of different activities they can do, so that they can adapt and accommodate how they might feel on any given day or moment.
Hey, Mandy, could you talk a little bit about types of physical activities? Because I know at Can Do programs, when people hear the 150 minutes, they think immediately, well, I can't run for 150 minutes, or I can't lift weights. So what are the kinds of physical activities that people do in their daily lives that actually count for you as a PT as physical activity?
Right. So, for example, say if you're somebody who uses a wheelchair for your mobility, getting up and standing during commercials, that would be considered, that would count. That would count to your 150. Say you're a wheelchair user again, or you have limited walking ability, folding the clothes. You know, there's a reason why after heart surgeries and heart attacks, they don't let people move their arms a lot, because it gets the heart going. If you really get to folding those clothes and moving, that can be that moderate intensity physical activity. If you're somebody who's ambulatory, it might be doing flights of stairs up and down. It might be picking up your kids' toys. Never underestimate how physically active picking up after your children can be. As the mother of 3, I can attest to that. So what's important, and I hope that illustrates that it all counts. It all counts. It all goes to that 150. So don't undervalue or devalue the movement that you are doing, but just think about ways that you can build upon it even more. And each person's starting point, that last bullet is important too. It will be different, and just and the pace of progress towards those goals can be different for each person. That fluctuation is normal, it's expected, and it's anticipated. So be patient with yourself as you work towards these goals.
Great.
So we also have to be realistic about this, right? While our best efforts and our best plans and the greatest PT that gives you this fabulous menu of things to do, life still gets in the way. MS still gets in the way and can create challenges. So what are some of the barriers and facilitators to diet and exercise? Why is it so hard, despite all of this fabulous evidence suggesting how important it is? Why is it so hard to maintain a good diet and a good exercise program? One of the primary barriers I think that we hear is time. And unfortunately, none of us are going to get more hours in the day than what we're given. So we have to really prioritize that. And that may be scheduling when you decide to do your exercise. That may be, as far as meal preparation, it may be timing that differently. It may be using a crock pot to save yourself some time so you're not having to do meal prep. But a little bit of planning can go a long ways to make time less of a barrier, and work with your team to figure out how to make that happen. Similarly, if you don't have a lot of time and you don't have 20, 30 minutes to do some exercise or physical activity, as I alluded to earlier, those little chunks of activity, that counts too, and that can add up. So sometimes sprinkling exercise and physical activity throughout the day can make it more manageable, and that time factor less of a barrier. Access to facilities or equipment. You know, this is a pretty common one also. It's not, most gyms don't have favorable parking for people who use wheelchairs. They're not always, the equipment's not always favorable to somebody who uses a wheelchair or somebody who uses a mobility aid. So that can be a real challenge, a real obstacle. Fear of falling. I mean, this is huge. You don't want to go to a big public gym, a big public place, and have a fall. It's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. No support can be a barrier. If you need someone to help encourage you, if that's how you find your motivation is the support of others, and you don't have that, that can be really challenging to stay adherent to any type of exercise or diet program. Fatigue, right? Sometimes you just don't have anything left in the tank at the end of the day. And that is your huge barrier to you preparing meals or to managing or participating rather in a good exercise program. Self-consciousness. I hear this often. I can't do it the way I used to, so I may as well not do it at all. So you just throw in the towel because it's just not the same. Transportation. We see this in PT a lot. If somebody's reliant on others for transportation, then that's just that other variable that can kind of throw a wrench in things if you can't are unable rather to participate in exercise. Knowledge of exercise and diet strategies. I'll speak more towards the exercise route. I think sometimes people feel uncomfortable. They feel a little hesitant, I think is the right term, because their body feels so unfamiliar to them and it's always changing, so you don't know what to do, when to do it. So that knowledge can be a barrier. Mood and cognitive symptoms. Again, Roz touched on this, I touched on this. That can be a challenge if you're suffering from depression, anxiety. That can be a barrier to wanting to participate. Similarly, cognitive symptoms can be a barrier to remembering what exercises to do, how to do them properly, and other things like that. I would add that some other barriers, and Roz, you can toss any others out that you can think of, would be weather. The weather can make it very difficult. We live in Nebraska. There's snow on the ground, ice on the ground. It's not really motivating to want to go out to the gym or do other types of exercise. And the other one I would add would be money. You know, it's costly sometimes to buy more nutritious food. Sometimes it's costly to find the resources to get on the right exercise programs. Co-pays can be really high to meet with a physical therapist, and gym memberships can be really costly too. So I would say money can be a huge barrier as well. Any others that we forgot about, Roz?
No, you thought of the ones that I was going to say, but I would encourage all of you to reach out to the MS advocacy organizations, MS Association of America, MS Foundation, and the National MS Society, because there are some funds available to help with some of the exercise programs or equipment that might be useful for you. So check those out. You can go to their websites and they will let you know what kinds of support that they can offer.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, Roz. So patient advocacy organizations like MSAA, National MS Society, Can Do MS, hopefully we are facilitators, right? Hopefully we are that nudge or that trigger that helps you to stay on a good path when it comes to diet and exercise. Other facilitators that we have listed here are your healthcare team members. You know, use them, use their knowledge, allow them to help motivate you and guide you and get you back on track if you start to feel like you're kind of in a bad spot when it comes to diet and exercise. Another facilitator, another option that could help address some of these barriers would be some of the online exercise classes that are available. In Nebraska, we have an organization called MS Forward, and they provide online exercise classes. That's msforward.org. A couple other resources that are specific to MS. One is msworkouts.com, and then another one is also the msgym.com. So I'm sure there are many, many others available and out there, but those would be a few to kind of start with. But I would collaborate with your healthcare team before participating in any of those online exercise classes, just to make certain that they're suitable to you and that they're addressing your goals and your needs. As far as diet, you can think about some of those grocery and meal delivery services. You know, let somebody else use their energy to do your grocery shopping, and you can just drive by and pick it up. Let them put it in your trunk for you. Cooling strategies. I would argue that cooling strategies are often underutilized, both for when it comes to exercise as well as meal preparation, because it can get pretty hot in the kitchen when you're trying to cook, and that can have an impact on symptoms. So some of the research suggests that as little as 1/10 of a degree can impact symptoms. So sometimes cooling before or during your exercise or meal preparation can lower your core body temperature just enough that you have a little more wiggle room before you hit that threshold where your symptoms start to be aggravated. And that may allow you to do more and participate more. And a couple cooling strategies or cooling resources rather would be the Polar Products resources. Frog Togs is another one, and I just heard about one called Therm Apparel. So check those out. I'm sure there are others, but again, collaborate with your team to find the one that works best for you. And last, but certainly not least, what is the other facilitator? Mobility aids and adaptive equipment. I think often people have reluctance to use mobility aids and adaptive equipment, specifically because they feel like they're giving in to the disease. They also have a reluctance, understandably, to using a more progressive aid. So going from no assistive device to using a cane to using a walker. That progression feels like it's just taking a little bit more away. But I would argue that the right mobility aid and the right adaptive equipment will allow you to do more safely. And when I was thinking about this, I was reminded of a patient of mine who absolutely did not want to use a mobility aid. And he had a lot of gait imbalance issues, a lot of disorganized movements. So he was a fall risk and had some challenges with that. But he could walk about 5 minutes without a mobility aid. We gave him a walker reluctantly. I probably should have bribed him with some candy or something. But we gave him a walker, and he went from walking not 5 minutes, but walking 20 minutes. So imagine the impact that can have, that mobility aid just had on his overall fitness levels, his comorbid health conditions. Again, it allowed him to do more successfully and safely. So never, I would encourage you not to close the door on those mobility aids and adaptive equipment without really giving them a good fair shot. So Roz, bring us home with Jan and John again.
Okay, so we hope you haven't forgotten them, but just as a reminder, these are the things we talked about for Jan and John. Jan is, got gradual worsening of her balance and walking. She's falling almost monthly. She's got fatigue and leg weakness. She uses a four-wheeled walker when she's out in the community, but she's also dealing with these comorbid health conditions that we've talked about. John, about the same age, has gained weight recently, now has type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol. His blood pressure is up, and he's anxious and worried about Jan's disease progression. And together, they're not eating as healthily as they used to, primarily because of her fatigue, but they've also stopped being as physically active together. So let's look at what we're going to recommend for them based on all the things we've talked about tonight. So starting with Jan, our dietitian colleagues would encourage her to increase her fiber and fluid intake to help manage her constipation and any bladder symptoms she might be having, to manage her salt intake so that she can be more heart healthy, and optimize her calcium and vitamin D to protect her bones. In terms of exercise, the team would work with her on increasing her strength, her balance, and her aerobic exercise, because if she is on her feet more and is getting more exercise and is optimizing her diet, she'll be protecting her bones as well as helping her MS health. And of course, we want her to monitor her blood pressure, get regular bone density checks, because she is not being as physically active as she was, and as she's at an appropriate age for a checkup. And we would like her depression to be adequately diagnosed and effectively managed, because if she continues to feel depressed, it'll make it harder for her to do all these other things that we're hoping she'll do to take better care of herself. John also has a to-do list, right? We want him to consult with a dietitian to see if he can get his weight back under control and manage the type 2 diabetes more effectively, and certainly to pursue a heart-healthy diet. And so the occupational therapists and the dietitians can work together to help Jan and John figure out how to put together healthy meals without it being too exhausting or too time-consuming, so that they can each be healthier. We would like John to consult a physical therapist like Mandy for exercise, for weight management purposes, to help manage his low back pain, and also to help him learn how to help Jan safely, so that he's not injuring his back or neck or shoulders as he's trying to help Jan after a fall or help her transfer. His own safety is critically important to his role as a helper for Jan. And we want him to see his primary care physician for management of the vascular conditions that he's dealing with. So they each have a hefty amount to pay attention to, but the healthcare team can really help them prioritize these issues and figure out, okay, what do we need to take on first? How can we do this in the most effective way? And how can we support you, Jan and John, as you work on your health and wellness?
So together, they have a lot of work. You're right, Roz. They do have a lot of work. But I do agree that if they work together and they encourage each other, I do think that they can be more successful. So consulting with an occupational therapist together, figuring out those meals that are simpler, but still healthy and still address their dietary needs. Work on simplification of those meals. So maybe it's using crock pots, maybe it's doing cutting and doing a lot of the meal preparation on the weekends. Maybe it's modifying the kitchen a bit, moving things around. Sometimes simply rearranging and putting the items that you use most often can help reduce fatigue in the kitchen, and that leads to fatigue management. So as we mentioned about cooling strategies and how that can impact fatigue and symptoms, sometimes using some of the cooling vests, some of the cooling products available can be really helpful. Anticipating other adaptations that might be needed in the future, this is kind of coupled with what the PT would also be doing. But an occupational therapist might be talking to Jan and John about how the home might be adapted to potential future needs for the wheelchair use, more wheelchair use rather. And they might also be talking a little bit about driving and vehicle adaptations as well, so that Jan can continue to do what she wants to do and they can continue to do things together. So in addition to consulting with occupational therapists, hopefully they'll talk with a PT too, and together they can kind of figure out what are some fun things that we can still do together. Adaptive cycling, there are many options for bicycling nowadays. Perhaps for this couple, they could use, maybe Jan could use a recumbent bike rather. There are hand cycles that she could use as well, and then also some tandem cycling options. So There are lots of adaptations if we want to continue to work with them when it comes to cycling. Additionally, it might be appropriate to encourage them to look at other things they can do together, other options. Maybe something like dancing would be really enjoyable for them. What other things bring them joy? What other things that they can do together that is still a lot of fun and encourages physical activity? So the PT can help them find that. And then also, again, anticipating other adaptations that might be needed in the future. And that would be something the PT would again collaborate with the OT to find out the best combination of adaptations that might be needed. So Jan and John will be set. So hopefully this evening, Roz and I have walked you through this very broad and big topic of diet, exercise, and healthy behaviors. But hopefully we've given you some nuggets, not chicken nuggets, but nuggets of information that you can find helpful and that will help you to work towards your own diet and exercise goals.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Mandy and Roz, for all that great information. We actually have one more polling question to sort of wrap up our evening, and should be on your screen now. And that's we were curious what your biggest takeaway from tonight is. So is it addressing your health and comorbid conditions? Is it modifying your diet? Is it engaging in more exercise and physical activity? Is it working with your support partner to identify common activities and their needs? Or is it something else, other? So go ahead and answer this last polling question. It's a good way to wrap up tonight. We talked about a lot in a lot of different categories. So we'll give people a couple more seconds here. And Mandy, you win.
Woo-hoo! That's great. This is wonderful. We hope that regardless of what your goals are, what your biggest takeaway is, that you can find the healthcare team members to help you work towards those goals.
That's excellent. Thank you so much again, Mandy and Roz. Hopefully this information was helpful for people, and Jan and John, our scenario kind of resonated with some of the situations and thoughts that you may be going through. And we're going to go ahead and get to Q&A here in a second. So in your chat and question box, you can submit some questions. We have a lot of questions that already came in during registration, so we'll use some of those questions. But two things as people are submitting questions. First of all, if you do have to leave early, we totally understand. But there'll be a survey that will pop up as soon as you close out of tonight's webinar. Really important for you to complete that survey. It lets us know what was valuable, what we wish we had talked about, what we're doing well, what we can improve upon. So please answer that survey. And then the second thing is just a reminder that this is part 2 of a 3-part series. And again, last week we talked about emotional, cognitive, and spiritual well-being. That webinar is available on YouTube and on the Can Do MS website. And then next week we're going to finish off by talking about 3 different areas of wellness, and that's work, home, and relationships. So that'll kind of tie our whole series together. So we hope you've enjoyed it and kind of understand the big picture questions that we're talking about. So again, next week, work, home, and relationships. So that'll be a good way to wrap up the series with Mandy and Roz. So we'll go ahead and get to a few questions. We have about 10 minutes, and these are going to be some pretty high-level questions. If you're looking for more specific information about diet or exercise, we have dozens of webinars and articles on the Can Do MS website. These are sort of high-level questions about how they relate to overall wellness. And so we'll start with diet. And so we've got a few questions about meal prep. And again, a lot of these questions came during registration. And people just struggle with meal prep because of energy, because of dexterity or tremors in their hands. Or cognitive difficulties, getting to the grocery store and just not remembering what you have and what you need. Any tips with specifically the meal prep? We know kind of what we need to get diet-wise, but preparing those meals, any tips to overcome some of those physical and cognitive barriers?
Well, I'll start with some of the physical barriers, if that's okay, Roz. So if you're having some challenges during meal preparation with maybe standing balance while you're cutting or stirring, sometimes something as simple as sitting more or bringing all of your items over to the table can be helpful, or using a tray to do that. There are many, many, many gadgets, and an occupational therapist would actually be the person you would want to talk to. All of the gadgets that are out there are a whole webinar in and of itself that can really specifically work with each individual challenge, whether it's a device to help you cut better, a rocker bottom knife, or a device that allows you to keep your bowl steady while you're stirring with only one hand. That functions well. So there are many options available to you, but again, I would talk to an occupational therapist about that. And then we touched on the cooling strategies to keep you cooler while you're cooking. That can often be helpful as well too, to keep the physical symptoms at bay.
So in terms of cognitive symptoms, I think the key is organization, and it starts with your grocery shopping. So there are wonderful apps for a smartphone or things that you can print out from a website, which are just checklist grocery shopping lists. So you can take a copy of that list, just check off the items that you have to get so that you're not writing the list and having to remember. The list cues you, and you just mark the ones you want. And some stores have them that are organized by aisles so that you can actually shop in your store in a very energy efficient way. And then in your kitchen, when you're actually doing food prep, remember how valuable recipes are. So recipes are an organizational tool. So if you're trying to cook a meal, you start by organizing all the tools and the ingredients that you're going to use in one place. So you're not constantly walking back and forth across the kitchen to get the things that you need. So you work in a workspace, and then following a recipe, even if it's for something you think you know by heart, you have a recipe and you follow a step-by-step procedure, because then you're less taxed, you're less cognitively fatigued by doing it, because the organizational strategies are all laid out, including what time do you have to start cooking in order to finish on time to get a meal on the table.
All great tips, and certainly something it sounds like your rehab team or mental health professional or dietitian can certainly help out with. So that's a great diet question. We'll move on to exercise, and the biggest barrier, it seems, that a lot of people that are writing in have is just not being able to stand. And there's so many exercises that's sort of geared towards standing or getting on the floor. Mandy, how would you generally how to adapt exercises if you can't stand or get on the floor?
Sure. So I would encourage you to reach out to a PT, again, to personalize your exercises to your abilities, because there may be different positions that work more optimally for you. But in general, there are a lot of exercise options that can be done in sitting. So again, don't underestimate the intensity that you can exercise at it when you're in a seated position. So again, there are many resources available to you, available out there if you reach out to your rehab team, and they can guide you in the direction that's most helpful.
Great, thank you so much. We'll wrap up. We did diet, we did exercise. So talking about healthy behaviors, and I really appreciate this question. It encompasses so many things. So this person's asking, what are the 3 most important behaviors that we should act on to promote a healthy lifestyle? So if you had to kind of narrow it down to 3 big behaviors, that's a good starting point. What would you say?
Well, I will start with that, and I think it's kind of a recap of what we talked about tonight. Now that we know the impact of comorbid health conditions, not only on overall health and well-being, but on the MS disease process, I would really advocate focusing on the strategies that help you reduce or eliminate or prevent those comorbid health conditions. And as we talked about tonight, looking at the kinds of foods you eat and how much of them you eat, looking at the amount of exercise and physical activity you get, those will all help you manage those in addition to getting the good primary care that you need. It's really important to remember that seeing a neurologist is very, very important, but your neurologist is a specialist in your MS care. Your neurologist is not focused on your overall health and well-being. So seeing the primary care physician, getting those checkups that Mandy talked about, and really making sure you're doing as much to manage whatever other health conditions you have in addition to your MS, is really the way to go, which is why we picked the topics that we picked tonight. So thank you for that question. It gave us the opportunity to reinforce our messaging.
Two other behaviors that people have specifically mentioned. I'm going to try to do a 2-for-1 here as we're running out of time. Sleep and smoking, two behaviors that we all know are important, but are there research specifically linking sleeping and smoking with MS just beyond, smoking is bad and sleep is good? Any kind of specific MS related?
So I will start with that. The data on smoking are really very, very compelling. Smoking increases the risk for getting MS in the first place, whether it's active smoking or passive smoking, meaning you're just exposed to other people's smoke. It also hastens disease progression. So those people who smoke or are exposed to the smoke are going to progress more quickly, and stopping smoking slows progression. So if you can't think of any other reason to stop smoking, it acts sort of like a treatment in and of itself for your disease. Sleep is incredibly important because, first of all, people with MS experience a lot of fatigue. It's the most common symptom. And one of the contributing factors to that fatigue is disrupted sleep. And for many reasons in MS, sleep is disrupted. It can be a primary sleep complaint like sleep apnea. It can be having periodic limb movements, which means that your limbs are moving even though it's not waking you, it's disrupting your sleep cycle, and it's certainly waking the person next to you who gets kicked. But those periodic limb movements disrupt sleep. Multiple trips to the bathroom certainly disrupt restful sleep. And we know that people with MS have disrupted sleep patterns just related to their MS. So it's very important, if you're suffering from fatigue or you feel like you have disturbed sleep, to consult with a sleep specialist who can find out exactly what factors are disrupting your sleep and help you address them. So putting those two together, stopping smoking and addressing your sleep are both going to help you feel significantly better, and they're worth your attention.
That's great. And as I'm looking here, we received a lot of questions about sleep. So in addition to directing people to some of our webinars on sleep, we'll attach a PDF of an article written by one of our other programs consultants specifically on sleep and MS, and we can include that in our follow-up email. So very important behavior. So we're glad that people are curious to know more about that. We have time for one more question. I think it's a great one that this person sent in that I think wraps up. All this information and ideas are great, but MS throws so many curveballs. So the question is, how do you keep a positive attitude about diet, exercise, and healthy behaviors despite the unpredictability of MS?
That is a very big question. And I think, attitude is kind of a key to all of these things. And one of the things we learn at Can Do programs, in the groups that we do, in the consultations, and just the programming is that people get so much support from each other for this. So from my perspective as a psychologist, I think it's really about putting your support team together. And as Mandy mentioned, it's not just your family members or your loved ones who can support your efforts and share these efforts with you. It's your healthcare team. They can be cheerleaders for you as well, because everybody wants you to be successful at these things. So make sure that you build your team, and then also pay very careful attention to your mood. And I say this again, I'm a psychologist, so it's the way I think, but we know that depression is very common in MS. It is one of the most common symptoms of the disease. 50% of people experience significant depression. And when you're feeling like you just don't have the energy or the or you just don't care, you can't make yourself care about these things, it's important to ask yourself if your mood is okay, and maybe check in with your healthcare provider to see if maybe an evaluation of your mood might be helpful so that you can get the help and treatment that you need, which will help with all these other things you're trying to do.
Well, again, thank you so much, Mandy and Roz, for your sharing your knowledge and your expertise, and really making us thinking of a new roadmap to hopefully living better with this disease, and thinking a little bit bigger picture on overall wellness. So thank you everyone for participating. Thank you for being here tonight or watching on our archive. I'm going to close out by just telling you about a few more resources, because we really believe that knowledge is power, and there's so much out there. So on the Can Do MS website, which again is cando-ms.org, we do a monthly webinar series on all sorts of different topics. So you can sign up once for that, and you'll be registered for the whole year. If we didn't get to your question tonight, we have something called Ask the Can Do team, where you can submit a question and we'll pass it on to a consultant like Mandy or Roz to try to get you an answer, and we share those anonymously online. And then we have all sorts of different in-person programs, which, as Roz mentioned, is just getting people together in the same room to share their experiences is so important and valuable. So please, we hope this is just the beginning of your journey with Can Do MS. In addition, as we mentioned, this is part of a wellness series that we're doing with MS Path to Care. In addition to these webinars, we have some great podcasts that you can find on Apple or any wherever you get your podcast from. And Roz and Mandy helped out with those, along with a couple that's been living with MS for over 30 years. So there's 3 episodes that mirrors our 3 topics for the webinars. And so you can listen to those and hear their experiences with all these different areas of wellness, and kind of adds a nice human element and some stories from another couple living with MS. So please go ahead and check out those podcasts. And again, this is part of MS Path to Care. So to kind of learn about what this model is, please visit mspathtocare.com. You'll see all sorts of great resources. We have a whole other set of webinars on healthcare resources and healthcare team. As I mentioned, this is part of a 3-part series, so you can find all that on mspathtocare.com. And we really hope that you'll join us next Thursday, same time. You're already registered. So please join us again. We'll finish out the series by talking about work, home, and relationships. And again, this webinar, along with all of our webinars, are archived on cando-ms.org. And one last reminder, please, again, fill out those program surveys with as much detail as you can. We really want to know what resonated, what you wish we had talked about. That's really important to us. So again, thank you all for joining us this evening. Mandy and Roz, thank you for all your hard work with Can Do MS. Any closing words for our audience this evening?
I'm looking forward to next Thursday.
Thank you all, and have a good evening.
Take care.
All right, thank you very much. We'll see you next Thursday.
Good night.